Oh, right, man, I'm dying from just how cold it is. But how's it going, everyone? My name is Renegade Operative, and I decided to do a nice video on this cool idea that was sparked up by So Says Jay. And he says something to the effect of, why do people love video game remakes a lot more and they hate film remakes? And there's a lot of very interesting takes and a lot of differences between the two mediums that we need to sort of illustrate. And as I give my own opinion, I will link the original video in the description. So I'm gonna just get right into it, and I'm gonna give my overall opinion. Why do people love game remakes a bit more? Let's start from there. I think the reason is because with a video game, you have an easier leeway to go back and fix something from 20 years ago and make it work. I think a good case in point is going back and how they fixed the Resident Evil games. And you're gonna get a lot of like examples in this video, but how they went back and there was tank controls and fixed camera. Now, when you try to migrate that to the modern era, you're not gonna see a lot of mainstream games do fixed camera, tank control, survival horror games. It's just something that exists mostly for the indies, but since Resident Evil reinvented itself so many times, what they're focused on now is third-person horror, first-person horror, and refining that and refining the controls and the camera angles and the style to fit the modernized times and make it feel better, play better, look better, better voice acting. You get the general gist. It's a lot of layers to make the cogs in the machine work, and somehow it just does. They try to migrate the aesthetics over, so you have that slow build, that dark brooding horror still just symbolic in the atmosphere, as opposed to them migrating it poorly. And I think what works there is because people want to play newer, updated, modernized games and try to harken back into remakes and tap into what they love, whether it's like people who want to play an updated version of the original, or there's people that never played a Resident Evil game, never played a Dead Space game, never played a Silent Hill, and they want to go back and, you know, say, oh, now it's my time to get into the whole series because I never played this before. So it feels like lightning in a bottle being captured. You can capture the best of both worlds with a video game remake, because there's so much going on and there's so much you can get right, and because it's gameplay, it could easily be redone and it could feel like a new game in the process. Like Resident Evil 2 Remake feels like a new game from the ground up, start to finish. It feels like it, new mechanics and everything, and that's what you have to account for a good remake. And if it sticks the landing hard. The reason why people hate movie remakes, I feel, and there's not bad movie remakes out there for a large majority. It's not like, I want to say, video game adaptations that have like a far worse rap and a far worse sort of circumstance of discussion around it, as opposed to movie remakes. There are good movie remakes out there. The Thing, The Fly, Dawn of the Dead from Zack Snyder, that was a really good fucking movie remake. People love that one. Then there's Friday the 13th, the remake that came out, or remake, reboot, that came out like 2009. That was really good, showing that Jason is running. He's a crazy, you know, woodsman that will set up traps, and he's very meticulous in nature. That was very good. Heat, that was from a show called LA Takedown, I believe, and they remade that into a more gritty, serious movie, The Departed. They took that from Eternal Affairs and they Americanized it, and it worked out. They turned it into an Irish sort of like Boston mobster movie, and that was really well received. So there are good remakes, and I think what makes those movies great, you know, Scarface and everything, is because they take it, they put a little bit more grit on it. or they add in new elements that really worked and wasn't fundamentally there for the character initially. When it comes to hating movie remakes, again, there are some bad ones out there. A lot of people are currently crapping on The Crow. And I haven't seen The Crow remake yet, but I think the fundamental changes to that movie of making it more about the love story and not sticking the landing in certain areas and meandering with the pace, from what I heard, despite having like positives and negatives, is probably something that's not really resonating or sticking. Like, I feel like the original movie, if this new movie has pacing issues, it was perfectly paced for the original. Like, you love Shelley and Eric out of the gates, and then it was a full-on revenge story, and you got it, and it was paced through, and you went through, and that's why that's the best Crow movie so far. Like, personally speaking, I feel there's certain quirks and aspects and thematics and characterization and storytelling and changes they have to do, because ultimately you can't have the same lines or sort of have the same beat for beat plot without it feeling lazy or half-hearted or anything of that nature. You gotta spice it up eventually in a remake, and I think if you don't get those core fundamentals right in a movie, it stands out more and it feels like a lesser experience. It feels like a more diminished product compared to the original if they don't nail certain characterizations or thematics or new additions right. And that takes a lot of writing, acting, and thinking about what you're gonna do for your next move and spicing it up just enough to stand out a lot more than the original. Like I said, a video game is mostly interactive. You're going to be playing that game. You're going to be initially saying to most developers, hey, it feels better. There's like not really a lot of rare cases where the gameplay is mostly shit in certain remakes. Like, the goal is to modernize the game and make it feel better and good. The only example I can think of a really bad remake on all fronts for a video game is 13. Like, 13 was boo-boo, all right? 13 was really bad. So but they didn't get the core aspect of remaking the game and making it feel good to a modern audience. For a remake of a movie, it's a lot more ire, and it's a lot more stupid changes they seem to make despite the formula being right there. Like, I'm talking, there's no way you should be making a RoboCop movie PG-13. Like, no way on earth. You see this dude who was the RoboCop, I think it was Alex Murphy, right? Him getting blasted by shotguns in the original, like, blasted to pieces, his arms, everything shot in the head. Like, I'm talking RoboCop was a brutal movie, and when you take the aesthetic of that away, it's a lot more damaging. Like, some horror remakes for video games still have that creepy vibe and aesthetic no matter what has changed. Like, Silent Hill still is looking creepy with Silent Hill 2, Resident Evil still creepy, Dead Rising still wacky. But when you remove an entire aesthetic of a horror movie, or you remove the entire aesthetic of like a sci-fi movie, an action movie, and then you dumb it down, it starts to hurt the film a lot more and negate the point of what the movie was made originally to begin with, which is, again, that brutality in RoboCop, that sort of parody of consumerism and everything. And when you don't get it and you make everything more generic, it comes off that way in movies, which is why some movies like, you know, Total Recall, they didn't get it, they failed. And there's a lot more examples. You illustrated too much with Freddy, you made him way too creepy in that Nightmare remake, and people felt the ick, they didn't like it. It lacked subtlety at that point. You see what I'm saying? Like, a game can stumble along the way, but as long as the gameplay is paramount and people like the updates and they say, hey, this game from 20 years ago, Dead Rising from like 20 or something years ago, you know, I could play this new one and be like, damn, I much would rather prefer to play this than the other one where it has some stumbles along the way. I don't want to deal with that old school Survivor AI where they run into walls and get shot by people. This is much more rewarding because it is interactive. And that's what I feel. Now for the future, which I have to describe, all right? It's come down to it. It's come down to this. Do I think that movie remakes are going to catch on and get better over time? Yes. Yes, I won't count it out. Just because it's not really big and super prevalent as equivalent to seeing like a lot of comic book movies. Like, it's not like a fad for a lot of remakes to come out, but they will come out, and you're gonna see some good and you're gonna see some bad. But if we get like a consistent streak of good, you're gonna be seeing a lot more, because there is movies they can go back and remake and flesh out that will work in modern times. I made a recording previously to this, and I described one of my ideas, and I'm gonna say it again right here. I think it would be a badass movie remake if you took The Godfather. And I know people are saying, oh no, The Godfather is precious. We want that to be like preserved. We don't need a remake. You're gonna see people saying that. People say that for games too. But I feel as though if you take The Godfather and you add some additions to it, maybe make it similar to Sopranos, right? A more modern Sopranos, like Godfather, deep storytelling with the characters, but it's a little bit more of a punch to it, a bit more of a dirty Italian Goodfellas like vibe to it. I think that will work. I really think that would, because one of the things that I love Godfather, but one of the things that I kind of liked in other mobster movies is they allowed themselves like more grounded dialogue. Like, these are adults. They swore a lot more. They said fuck, you know, shit, fuck this, fuck that guy. They were a lot more dynamic in their character traits and flaws with the language presented. And I think, you know, I know some people are going to be like, oh, you just want a Godfather where they say like fuck 1,000 times. But I think in that setting, that context, that will work. I mean, Scarface, they took the old Scarface movie, which probably didn't have all those expletives in the old one, and they made a new version with Pacino, and he was a Cuban immigrant, and he was going around being on cocaine, shooting people, but we liked that character in that context. We were kind of on his side, even though he was like kind of a dick. So you can make it work, and you can make enough changes under the right context and make interesting, compelling characters that follow sort of a narrative similar to the original characters, but done in a way where it's different enough and it feels unique on its own and it feels better. I feel like just a better sort of new rendition and adaptation is probably the way they should go for remaking film. And you only got one shot, not a chance to blow it. And just to cap everything off, I think it's really good because, again, there's a bigger market sometimes in video games. Like, video games have boomed to a huge popularity these days over film, which is, you know, it's unprecedented. There still is movies making like billions upon billions of dollars, but now there's video games that make continuous money for the new generation, like your Fortnites and whatnot. So there is an audience where you can appeal to a larger demographic of people, and you can just manage to come off clean if the game is good. Like, if word of mouth spreads so fast for good video games, it's unbelievable at this rate. So you're not only appealing to the folks who like modernized gameplay, but also are into seeing a story retold like Silent Hill 2 Remake, and they want to get their hands on it and play it, and you're appealing to both sides. Where it's like, once you lose the aesthetic of what made a particular movie, or if you can't do enough of a unique spin on it, then people seem to be a lot more critical about it, because they already know what it is, they already experienced what it was, they already seen it. What are you doing to maintain that attention of watching a new rendition of something that I loved again? And I think that does come up here. It's like, you know, there's a lot more positives and bells and whistles to fixing gameplay, but what are you doing if you just have the story and aesthetic and you're not doing anything unique and ambitious with it, and it's a lot more ire that way, probably because of it. Like, you don't see a whole litany of bad game remakes, but you see that the film remakes have not caught on yet, and the good ones are few and far between. Not as bad as video game adaptations have been for the last 20 years, but it's still not quite there yet. And like I said, I do believe that in the future we may get better remakes out there. I believe that the horror remakes, once again, I'm gonna co-sign this once more, they've been really good so far. They've been kind of getting those right here or there, so I'm not gonna say all of it is bad, because I would be a liar if I did. Anyway, this is Renegade Operative signing off. Tell me what you guys think of the video in question about people embracing game remakes a lot more than movie remakes. I can't believe they remade Night of the Living Dead like a bunch of times. Like, it's fucking ridiculous, dude, at this rate. And I guess for more ingenuity, I would love to see just someone take, you know, cross things over a bit. You know, remember when we had that, like, when a film was adapted to a video game like The Warriors, and they did something like that, and it migrated really well with the gameplay styles and the beat 'em up and just the hardcore like brawler aesthetic, where we had those adaptations. Like, can we see like just more crossovers with that and more material with that? Because I think you could do like a lot of cool shit that way. See a film adopted to a video game, or see a game adopted to a movie that's real good. Like, we're in the process of that transmedia marketing, where you can do something like this and you can just come off well. And I think that would be a great way to introduce remakes. If you want to remake the first Evil Dead with Ash, Bruce Campbell, make it into a game, and Bruce Campbell will do the voice, no problem. You could do something like that. Like, it's a lot of leeway and ideas out there, really, for both mediums. Just, you know, we need more discovery in the process, especially for film. It's got to get it right. It's got to nail it immensely and do something different enough to where it doesn't alienate the people. Like when they tried to make The Thing 2011 and they put in CGI, and the original Thing remake had practical effects. It's like, okay, what are you doing now? You know what made the original movie fantastic was the practical effects. Now you have like CGI, you fucked it up. And studio meddling and studio interference happens a little bit more often in film, as opposed to like some video games. I'm not gonna say that studio interference doesn't happen in video games, but when it happens to a movie, it really hurts it a lot more. It really does. And I know I'm gonna put this portion in the video, but I know there's gonna be a singular soul that says, Renegade, but what happens when a game changes too much, cuts too much out, and the soul of the original is lost? I'm never doubting that can't happen in a video game format. I'm just saying I agree with the idea that video games, in terms of remakes, are more loved, than sometimes a general audience can overlook sad cuts or sad things. Now, kindly and religiously look at this from the other side of the fence. Again, some of these people never played certain remakes at all, therefore they are playing a fresh new experience. They don't know about the park being cut, they don't know about more nemesis encounters. Of course you can educate someone about this, but they never would have known on their first playthrough. Thus, you know, if I never played the original RE3 in my life, I wouldn't have known any of this. I would have been like, yo, you know, this is a very good game, very well made game, nice and a little bit more action oriented than I would have probably liked that RE2, but the gameplay is fine, the dodge is fine, everything works accordingly. You always have to approach things from two perspectives when gauging remakes: the people who has played them and the people who has never played them before in their life. The other side of the fan base that cares about that stuff religiously, they are going to look at that and they're going to hold the game under the sun. That's what they're going to do. They're going to hold the weight of the game under a fire, but realize that sometimes a game can still come clean with a lot of changes or alterations. We've seen this with Dead Space Remake. Dead Space Remake changed a couple of things in the story and it was still received positively, but Resident Evil 3 cut a lot of things and it was received a little bit more negatively, but the game overall still sold. That's the thing here. Like, Resident Evil 3 is the prime example of cutting a lot of things out and it was still a success to the modern public casual audience. So you have to call a spade for what it is. You have to call a spade for a spade. Dead Space Remake was successful from a critical review standpoint, and Resident Evil 3 was successful from a critical financial standpoint. Whereas some of these movies and remakes that change too much, that make things PG-13, that turn Freddy into a little bit more of a diddler, it doesn't really go over that well at all, and there's no other redeeming factors to save it. And then you end up with a movie that's like, well, that was a dud, and it stays in the annals of history. And I know cut content is a major criticism with game remakes, but you also have to understand when it's still done good, when it's still done in a way where it's updated and refined as it's supposed to be, and it's still fun to play. Sometimes games, in a rare blue moon like Resident Evil 3 Remake, can beat the allegations. Still has good graphics, still has good voice acting. For the most part, it's a couple of lines that's like, I don't like some of the changes with those lines. Like, you want stars, I'll give you stars, when Nemesis is beating you in the back of the head. I thought that was funny, if anything, though. Good voice acting, good graphics, good gameplay, feels really good to play. They fixed the dodge system, which is something that needed to be fixed from the original Resident Evil 3. Again, it feels like movies that remake something and lose the thematic along top of not making the story or the plot or the blueprint of that remake more engaging and great. A lot more gets lost in translation, and I'm not saying that game remakes can't have that as well. It's just, if the fucking game is good, sometimes you can get away with it. It happens, and the sales sometimes dictate this, especially if Capcom does a remake and they cut some things out. Obviously though, sales regardless, there's still criticism of this remake to this day, and that's fine. That's totally fine, but I want you to know that there is still redeeming qualities for Resident Evil 3 Remake, and that's a hard pill to swallow, but it's also kinda true in a sense. Regardless if there was a Nemesis edition, I'm sorry edition, repackaged with all of the content available from Resident Evil 3 OG into Resident Evil 3 Remake, I would probably buy it because, hey, I'm an RE fan. I play this shit for entertainment, for people that enjoy said entertainment, and for people who want to see my opinion on said entertainment. That's how I feel. I do think that remakes need to be brimming with new content, and if you're going to replace something, it needs to be replaced with something adequate like RE4 Remake did. Otherwise, you know, at that point you do run into the syndrome of people questioning that cut content. Either way though, if a quote-unquote bad remake like RE3 can somehow really financially do well, then it kind of goes to show that people care a lot less than people would care for a movie being just critically financially bad. I don't think that The Crow is going to get a lot of profit after we've seen the reviews of them, as opposed to RE3 just somehow living on the merit of the things that were good in that game versus all the things that were bad in that game. You see what I'm saying? I know that was a long point to explain, but I wanted to really put that in there because I know someone's gonna be like, oh, you forgot about this, you forgot about cut content again. I don't know, movies just have a hard time, and they haven't really caught on with Thunder for the premise, for the idea of movie remakes becoming a bigger fad than what they are now. Nowhere equivalent to the amount of superhero movies that come out today. Nowhere near that. Movie remakes just haven't caught on with that magnitude quite yet. If we get a large slew of them, and I'm going to repeat this again, if we get a large slew of good ones, maybe the tide will turn, but that remains to be seen. Anyway, this is Renegade Operative really signing off this time. I know I said I was going to sign off before, but I had to get this point out, get this out, get this all across. And I'll see you guys next time in the Nexus verse or the multiverse or whatever the fuck it is. See you guys next time. For real, be good people. Laters. P.S. I still want that gritty Sopranos like Godfather style remake. Don't be holding out on me, Hollywood. Don't be holding out, you motherfuckers. All right, I'm out of here for real.